So even though I'm calling this a round the world trip, at the time when I was doing this tour in Morocco, I didn't know that I was going to travel further. So essentially this was kind of like a testing ground for more trips in the future. I left off the last video explaining that I dropped off my bike and Paul dropped off his bike with the shipping company that would take them both from south of UK to south of Spain. So here's us in Malaga. We met up with another rider, Liam from the band Cancer Bats. We just had to do a short ride over to the port and take a ferry into Tangier. Here's us at the port, strap the bikes on the ferry, and then a couple hours through quite rough sea. We couldn't help but rip around off-road a little bit before the sun went down. Here's us at sunset. So my luggage system already failed. The vibrations were too much for my ratchet straps. My whole toolkit essentially wiggled loose and my inner tube got eaten by the rear tire. So I was already down one motorcycle part and many more to come. In our next day, we had a lot of kilometers to cover. So I don't have a lot of pictures for this bit, but I can try and explain it with a story. So we were riding through this mountain road and I was in front, going maybe a little bit faster than I should be. And I was coming around a blind corner and there was a truck. So if you imagine a really long truck coming around a tight bend, and this is me coming round the same corner on my side of the road. Because the corner was so tight, the truck needed to take both lanes to make the turn, which essentially pushed me off the road into a ditch. And this is why I've got this big scrape on the right hand side. I hit the truck with my boot because I had steel toes on the boots that saved my toes massively, even though they hurt like a I broke my gear lever and my peg. Luckily Paul had a spare gear lever. I tried to take a picture of the police who were behind the whole convoy, even though they're meant to be in front, but they made me delete the pictures, but whatever. So there's not really any rules in Morocco. If you're stuck in a traffic jam, you can just go off-road. You make as many lanes as physically possible. We hit the motorway because we just had so many kilometers to cover that day. So the ride was a little bit boring and straight, but we eventually made it there to a really nice hotel. We didn't get to relax for too long because the next day, on the first day of riding, we had to get to Zagora. Here's everybody prepping their bikes. Here's my bike. Here's the hotel and just people prepping. The riding that day was pretty easy, just a lot of road until we hit a little bit of off-road in the last section. We went through a few villages as well. Classic thing in places like Morocco, kids like to wave or stick their hand out so that you would high-five them. And there's a kid here somewhere that sticks his hand out, and I remember that I didn't really slow down for him. I was going maybe 20 miles an hour, 30k, and I just stuck my hand out and just went slap. I remember my hand hurt, so his hand must have been in quite a bit of pain, but oh well. Here's us arriving at the first campsite. It was a nice, refreshing thing to drink some Moroccan tea, listen to some Moroccan vibes, and chill after a long day. Every evening, you check your bike to make sure that it was ready for the next day. Anything that was broken would need to be repaired. Depending on how much you broke your bike would depend on how late in the evening you need to stay out.
We added the bell to Ricky's bike.
So I fuck around a little bit with other riders, because why not? So day 2, we were going further into the desert. This was the start of the day. Here's some professional photos of me and other guys following me through a very rocky track. Bit of fun in the dirt. Sometimes people would get stuck and they would need a push. I didn't really think this through. I just ended up eating lots of sand in my face. It was really hot. 35 to 40 degrees Celsius. I'd always cover up drinking about 6 liters of water a day and not peeing once. You can see that my bike was looking a little bit weathered. Some other people on the trip, I did some additional decorations that I purchased in Morocco's markets. We had a bit of fun with the sand dune as well. I almost took the camera guy out when I was coming down. I think I shook him a little bit here. Once we got to the campsite for the day, a sandstorm began as we started drinking beers. But it was alright because we had goggles. Okay, so day 3, we had to make a loop back out of the desert. The mornings are really amazing. It's so quiet and serene. When you're walking across the hard ground, it's a bit like walking on snow because you can hear the crunch of the dry sand. The whole time we had a support vehicle, which was kind of cheating, I guess, but it was a tour which took away all the boring stuff out of the equation so you could just ride. So everybody had these navigation units that had the GPX route that allowed you to get from A to B. So you didn't have to stay in a group. At this point I found myself broken away from the rest of the group, and I came across a group of camels, so I stopped for a bit to film them.
Where are they walking? Where are you guys going?
They're quite disgusting in real life, but I love camels. This was another dude ripping through the sand. Sometimes we'd stop, play some music, wait for others to catch up. You try and find shade wherever possible. You'd stop at any opportunity to fill up, so any petrol station you go past, you fill up just in case. This is Paul's bike. I'll give you a second to figure out what's wrong with it. The technical term for his shocks is Annoyingly, I have to bleep out the swear words because YouTube doesn't like swearing. This is Liam on top of his mutt that he rode all the way from Birmingham, which is pretty insane. This is me digging a hole with my rear tire. And eventually we made it to our hotel for the evening, having some beers, chilling. Douche. This was the POV view of riding across the flat landscape. Just sometimes you'd hit a few hidden bumps, and when you're riding behind someone in really dusty conditions, you can't see anything. You can't actually see or read the terrain. This is another thing that broke on my bike. You can see that the battery box has these 4 mounting points, and the sheer vibration just broke the hard plastic apart, and my battery just sunk into the frame. So the next day I started moving closer to the mountain range. Overnight the mechanics did some of their Moroccan magic and used a soldering iron to melt holes in the plastic box, and then use metal wiring to loop around each bolt to hold it in place. It worked. So this picture needs another backstory. I'm not a morning person, and every day we'd wake up 6 in the morning, maybe earlier, and start riding by 7 or so because it was just so hot in the daytime and we had so many miles to cover. And by day 4 I was pretty knackered, really dehydrated, which I didn't realize. You have to drink your electrolytes, and my brain just wasn't functioning at all, especially since it was early in the morning. And as we were going over this hill, the road was turning over to the right, and I misjudged the corner because I didn't see the corner, and I just went into this ditch here, and the bike kind of went on its side. I damaged my front headlight, so smashed all the glass, and you can see the indicator that I mounted onto the headlight also broke. I punctured my brake cylinder tube, so my front brake was leaking. but the trusty mechanic cut a piece from his hydration pack and reconnected my front brake, and also pulled all the glass out of my headlight. This is David from Croyd Motorcycles. Another guy burned his clutch, so his trip was finished. Also took some pictures on the trip of the different riders and their bikes. This is Morgan. Can't believe he did the whole trip on the Harley. Pretty rad. And then at the next stop after the crash, because people don't really, you crash, nobody waits for you. People just keep going. So I didn't have time to fix stuff properly. Once I got to the next stop, we bent my rear brake pedal back into shape so I could have a rear brake again. I was basically riding brakeless for the last couple hours up until this stop, and you need a rear brake. That's the only brake you use when you off-road. So I kind of had no brakes for a couple hours. This is Paul's bike. He managed to find some new shocks from a quad bike. They cost him an absolute fortune, and apparently they were terrible, but it just meant that he could keep riding. This is some bikes coming in and the local kids trying to understand what the hell is going on. We hit some thick, really fine sand that they call fesh, and the trick to it is you're meant to move your body back as far as possible on the bike so that you get lots of traction on the rear wheel. Obviously you need to have low pressure in your tires for this, and you let the front wheel do all the skiing. And it's a bit like riding a uncontrollable and unpredictable bull, but at a slow speed. And you go as fast as possible in the highest gear you can, otherwise you'll burn your clutch out, like the other guy did earlier in the day. Some pictures that Ricky took of me. This one was when I got lots of air. You can see by this photo that you can't see the starting point. So there's a hill right about here, and that gives you a trajectory of how far I flew. Pretty much my pants. You can see the broken pedal here, and this is the fixed master brake cylinder. We arrived at our campsite for the evening. I couldn't help but rip around on the sand a little bit and obviously stacked it. And I got the bike stuck, really stuck. I had to walk back to the campsite to get somebody to help me to push it out. This is how you get petrol in the desert where there's no petrol stations. You hire some locals to fill it up in canisters and bring it to you in a Jeep. Isidoro jumping over the campfire. Day 5, and we got to climb further up into the mountains, into elevation. You can see that the terrain is changing from soft sand to rock. I was really pushing the bike to the point where it was starting to disintegrate. You can see that the front wheel was so dented, the guys would fix it for me with a blowtorch and a big hammer. We then had a little stop. Everybody's looking quite tired at this point. Refueling with some sugar. Then we went through this really windy, beautiful road in the mountains. You can hear that Harley roar. Even higher in elevation now, you can see the snow on the mountains. I think at this point it was actually quite cold. And the landscape was turning green, believe it or not. There's greenery in Morocco. By this point, me and Paul reached our final destination because we had to split from the rest of the group to make our way back to Tangiers and eventually south of Spain. My bike was really shagged. You can see here quite well in this picture how the tire was being eaten by the bolts that held my rear mudguard on. The suspension was bottoming out. It was hitting the underneath of my mudguard. So about halfway through I had to remove my mudguard, which solved the problem but caused quite a bit of chaos for people riding behind me because I would just chuck lots of stones at them. And then this happened, and I'll get my excuses out the way. I was dehydrated. We were riding for quite a while, and by this point I was tired. We were in Morocco during Ramadan, so there was nowhere to buy any food, so I was hungry, and because I was staying with pole for a couple of nights who snored quite a lot. I didn't get a lot of sleep. I probably snored as well, but essentially I was a hazard on the road. And as I was coming round this roundabout, I was in a complete dream state, thinking that I was there in that place 2 years ago, which I could not have been. And I kept on looking back behind me to try and get another glimpse at the roundabout. And before I knew it, my bike was just veering off the road. And if this is the bike and this is me on top of the bike, I sort of just jumped off and the bike just went off into this concrete ditch. And then it was really totally You can see here that I bent my forks. I crushed my starter button so the bike would no longer start. We had to push start it. Eventually I made it to the nearest mechanic just so we could fix the starter issue. And what he did was he attached 2 wires to the starter solenoid so I could basically jump start it. It was enough for me to just get it back over the border from Morocco and deal with all the issues later on. And this is when the bike finally arrived back at my house. You can see it's missing forks, looking more like a salvaged bike than one that used to run. And I'll be honest, I was ready to give up and just get a different bike, but I did fix it. And in the next few videos, I'll show you the long and tedious process of how I made it even better.